Today I'm going to be changing spark plugs, and this time around we're going to be working on my 2013 Camaro, but this will work on any car that's got an LS3 engine in it, including all the 5th gen Camaros from 2010 to 2015. You might be wondering why you'd want to change your spark plugs. Well, there's more than one reason. I mean, first of all, they could be bad, they could be old, or you could be wanting to change them because you're adding power to your car and the stock spark plugs aren't good enough for that task. In my case, I'm doing it because of the last reason, because I want to add power. And typically when you add boost or when you add power, in any form, you're going to raise the cylinder temperatures, above what they're normally at. And the spark plugs can actually glow hot and be a source of knock, once they get too hot. So what you want to do is get a plug with a colder temperature. They're rated in terms of temperature, so you can get plugs that are not going to get as hot and therefore not be prone to knock. Plugs that I got are these NGK Iridium 3689 model number, which is a TR6IX. The 6 in the TR6IX denotes the temperature level. The higher the number, the lower the temperature. So 6 is like one temperature level colder than what the car comes with. This is what the plug looks like itself. You don't have to gap it or anything like that. It's already compatible with the car. Although I have pre-cleaned all of these, you don't need to do that, but I like to do it because it's just an extra layer of performance that I'm just ensuring that it's going to work well. What I did was I took a steel brush, like just not a steel brush, we call it steel wool, like a mild abrasive steel wool, and just roughed up the top here because you get a little bit of corrosion around that contact, and that's where the boot goes over to provide the electricity. So I just wanted to rough that up a little bit, get off the corrosion, and then put some contact cleaner on it to dissolve whatever residue was left over. And then I put some like lubricant on the thread. But when we put them in the car, we're going to put some additional lubricant on there because those threads are pretty important, that you don't cross thread them, that you get them seated properly with the right torque, and then that you don't get blow by from the combustion gases. Tools you're going to need for this job: socket wrench, a couple of extensions, because some of these plugs are kind of far down in the engine bay. And this socket is a 5/8, but it's a special 5/8. It's a socket designed specifically for spark plugs because it's extra deep. It'll actually contain the entire spark plug all the way down to this nut, and it's got a little rubber washer in the bottom. Some of them have like rubber all the way around the inside. Mine doesn't. Mine just has the rubber washer at the bottom. Basically, that's just to protect from cracking or scratching up the porcelain insulator here, because it's a delicate component. The ceramic is the most delicate part of it, and you don't want to damage that. So get a good socket, like not like this one, but get a good socket for spark plugs. It'll look like this, and it'll be 5/8. And you might need some other basic tools, just as you come across difficulties. Sometimes the plugs are difficult to get out. I can't imagine what else you would need really, but this is the bare minimum anyway. And I've got 8 of these, so I'm just going to remove the stock plugs first and then put these back in. The procedure is very simple. It's just like unscrewing something and putting something back in. There's hardly any complexity at all to it. As with any automotive job, the complexity and the difficulty comes in running into snags, like something won't come out properly or whatever, right? And you just have to be careful with spark plugs because they're delicate. So we're going to start by just working our way around the engine. I'll show you where these plugs are. So if you take a look down in here, you can see these are all the coils that provide the high voltage for the plugs. And down here you've got your spark plug wire, and then this is the boot that goes around the plug. So once you pull that boot off, there's a little metal shield around it as well. The boot itself is rubber, and the shield on the outside is metal. But you just, pull that off, and the spark plug will be underneath it, exposed, and then you can get your socket in there and unscrew it counterclockwise. So there's 4 of those on the driver's side, and naturally there'd be another 4 on the passenger side, and each one of them is going to have its own challenges getting at it because they're kind of buried down there, so there might be some interference from different components getting in the way, but we'll see how it goes. I'll just start, and work my way around and see how far we get. So the first step's going to be obviously removing the boot. So to remove the boot, very simple. You just get your hand around it as best you can. You might have to disconnect a sensor or two, but get your hand around that boot, twist it, rotate it to break it free, and then pull straight back, and it should pop off literally. And once you do that, you should be able to get at the spark plug. So let's start on that. Now, as I just finished saying, you always run into problems. Nothing's ever as simple as it is supposed to be. So in this case, the access to these boots is just so restrictive because it sits right in between the manifold, like this. And for you to get your hand around that to pull on it is almost impossible unless you have really tiny hands or something. So what I found I had to do was I had to take a pair of pliers and grab onto the back of the boot like this. Just grab onto the boot, the rubber part, and again, you want to try really hard not to damage anything because you don't want to scratch or damage the wire. You don't want to pull on the wire. You can pull on the boot, but if you squeeze too hard on the boot, you might tear the rubber because it's soft rubber, and you don't want to do that. So you have to be very careful, and if you work it around and pull back on it, you should be able to eventually get it off, as I was able to do, but not an easy task, certainly one that you have to be very careful with. So now that all the driver's side boots are off, you can see right here, if you can see that where my finger's pointing, that's the end of the spark plug right there. So that's where the socket's going to have to go for you to get that plug off, and you want to make sure, of course, that you don't drop it down the engine somewhere when it comes out, and then you're going to have to get the new plug in there without being really able to see all that much. You can see visibility is limited, so you have to be very careful, of course, and replace those. I'm going to do the other side first, and then we'll get to the installation, or the deinstallation of these plugs, I guess. This will be the next step after I get all the boots off. Just so you have some understanding of the effort required to do this job, the passenger side is like 10 times worse than the driver's side, and in order for me to get the last 2 boots off, the ones at the back, I had to climb up on the car. So I was like kneeling on the engine block and reefing on this thing with all my strength, and yeah, you could easily give yourself a hernia doing this. I'm drenched in sweat, I'm out of breath, my hands are shaking. Again, not a complicated procedure, but extremely, high on the effort scale. So don't do this if you're not 100% confident you can finish the job. And in retrospect, I'm wondering if I should have just gotten a professional to do it. But I did get them off, and hopefully I didn't damage anything in the process. My pliers slipped a couple times. I wasn't able to get any injector off by hand. I had to use pliers for all of them. And sometimes they slip and they hit the wire, but the wires look like they're okay. So now that all the plugs are exposed, I'm just gonna grab my socket here. Use as many extensions as you think you will need, and just go around the car and loosen them in a counterclockwise direction, and make sure they don't fall down, and carefully pull them out. Try not to disturb any of the debris that might have collected around the actual spark plug hole. If you want, you can use some air in a can, the stuff that they use to blow dust off of computer boards, if you don't have an air compressor. I don't have an air compressor, so The air in a can is an alternative to that. But essentially, we're just gonna do what I said. You know, just start on one side, and where's that boot? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's the last one there. So I'm just gonna see if I can get my socket wrench in there. Hang on, I don't know if I got it or not. I do not think I have it yet. Hang on, give me a second. Another word of caution, wear gloves when you're doing this. I just sliced my thumb open pretty badly because the socket wrench broke free the torque on the spark plug, and my thumb went into this piece of metal here, which doesn't look so bad, but it's pretty sharp on the edge. So figures the one time I don't wear gloves I get a cut like that. But yeah, just wear gloves the whole time, and unless it's really hindering your dexterity. But with this kind of work, you're mostly reefing on things anyway, so it's not really the type of work that you need to have bare fingers for. But anyway, I had to change the socket extension because the other one was too long. But basically, now I've got it, so it's coming off. So you just have to, you know, get it out of that hole, and then make sure you don't lose it. So I've chosen to install the new spark plugs as I take the old ones out, just so that I don't leave a whole bunch of ports open and exposed. You'll notice that I'm starting to hand tighten this first. You have to ease the spark plug in and make sure to reverse thread it multiple times to make sure you're not cross threading it forward. Otherwise, if you feel any resistance at all, stop immediately and reverse thread it until you get, you know, the correct threading. But you just want to hand tighten it like this until you can't hand tighten it anymore, which is right around here. Now, the rule of thumb is, once you get to the point where you can't hand tighten it anymore, you want to turn it about a half a turn to maybe 2/3 of a turn of a full rotation, using your socket wrench. If you don't have a torque wrench, that is. If you have a torque wrench, you can easily just torque it down to the required specification. But if you don't, you have to be very careful because you don't want to strip the threads. And if you strip the threads, you're really screwed. That's like engine rebuild, or major problems there. So just engage your, well, first put your socket wrench in clockwise mode here. Okay, now it's clockwise. So then you just get it down in there. Come on. Okay, there we go. Now, 1/2 a rotation, so that's about, it's about 1/3. No, that's no good. That's, no, I need to get it further up. There we go. That's about another 1/3 there. that's about another third there. I'll give it a little bit more because it still feels kind of loose. There. That's about all you want. No more than that. So I'll just work my way around, do the rest of them the same way. If you get it too tight, you're going to have problems. So just, like I said, half a turn to 2/3 of a turn is all you need. And you should feel it get pretty tight after 2/3 of a turn anyway. So let's just finish off the rest of them and then we'll put the boots back on. Okay, so here we are 3 frickin' hours later. Thank God you guys don't have to watch me do this. But yeah, the driver's side is a pleasure compared to the passenger side. I had to climb up on my car multiple times, and I actually had to disconnect the ignition coil wire, or the spark plug wire on that far one in the back there. I could not get any tool in there, or I couldn't get my hands in there. There was no way I was getting that plug in or out without taking that wire off. That boot, similar to the spark plug boot, you just pull on it. I had to use vice grips to get that off because it wouldn't come off either. And that was really hard. The second last one, also extremely hard because of all the fuel hoses in the way. And you don't want to damage fuel hoses because then you spray fuel everywhere and you burn and you die. The other two, not so bad, I guess, comparatively speaking. But the last two definitely are real pain, and you have to get up on the car to get at them. I don't think I'll ever want to do this again. Anyway, so with that done, really the only thing left to do is to put these boots back on. So putting them back on, I'm hoping, is going to be a lot easier than taking them off was. You can see there's this little spring thing, and inside there, you got the electrical contact. Apologies that my battery died at the most inopportune moment, but I was just about to show you the installation of the boot, and I can say thankfully that it was way easier than pulling it off. Like, way easier to put it on than it was to pull it off. So don't worry about putting it back on. That should be no issue for you. Just line up the center of the spark plug with the middle of the springs, like I was showing you before, and just push, and your own hand strength will be perfectly fine to put that back on. And you should hear an audible pop. You'll hear it pop, and then you'll know that it's on there. And you can wiggle it a little bit just to make sure that you're there, but it shouldn't be an issue at all. Just do that all the way around the engine, and then you're going to want to clean everything up. Make sure your spark plug wires are still secure. Sometimes when you're banging around, working on the engine, things come loose. Make sure everything's still seated. All these boots are still seated. And then just crank the engine over and see if it fires up, which I'm going to do now. Okay, so I'm about to fire up the engine for the first time after replacing the spark plugs. Let's see if she works. I should also mention that once you successfully get the motor started, you may want to use HP tuners, if you have it, to do a cylinder balance test to make sure that all cylinders are firing with equal power. The real-time tuning feature of HP tuners will allow you to check that by deactivating one cylinder at a time and letting you know if there's any power drop, relative from each cylinder relative to the next. That way you'll know if there's any kind of electrical issue. Most likely it'll just be a boot that's loose or something, so you'll have to go to that particular cylinder and wiggle everything, make sure it's all connected properly. If it still doesn't show that it's putting out the same power, you might have to pull that plug and examine it. It could be cracked or something else could be wrong, but let's see what happens. Okay, lessons in what not to do. I forgot to put one of the boots back on, so I was hearing this ticking sound and the car was running extremely poorly and rich. as you may have noticed. I didn't mention it, but I wanted to see what was wrong first. So yeah, I put that boot back on. Let's see what happens this time. That sounds quite a bit better. Okay, so I'm going to do my follow-up testing, but everything seems to be working satisfactorily. So that's how you change your spark plugs. Hopefully you don't have as much trouble as I did. But anyway, it's done, so thank God for that. Like, subscribe, comment. Thanks a lot, guys.